doing and how we're going to avoid it.
Okay.
That is my favorite part of this whole process.
Troubleshoot.
Yeah, and plan. So
Yeah.
you can do it. I think you can do anything if you plan it well enough.
There you go.
Okay. So, so the procedure itself, if you ask the docs how long it takes, they'll tell you that it takes about 45 minutes. They're lying. Okay, so it takes about an hour to put you all the way to sleep, and put all the tubes in and wires, and then it takes about 10 minutes to put the valve in.
Okay.
And then it takes about half an hour to wake you up and pull out of the wires. So you will have a puncture here and a puncture here, and I'll tell you about those. And then you'll have a big IV in your neck,
Okay.
a Swan-Ganz catheter. Do you know about those?
I'm sorry?
A Swan-Ganz catheter.
Okay. It's
Okay, familiar, right? And it's so funny because everybody complains about this. Open heart surgery patients for 24 years, no one ever noticed this. Okay, so it's just a function of not having anything to complain about. And the importance of it is it goes in the right side of your heart, up into your pulmonary artery, and from there we can measure all the pressures in your heart.
Okay.
So if your blood pressure isn't doing what we think it should do, we can figure out why, and we can treat it. So we can give you blood and fluid and drugs right in here.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. I want everyone to have one. I want to have one of my own.
Right.
Because I think they're wonderful. The other thing it has is it has a temporary pacing wire.
Okay.
So if we knock out your AV node, we can give you a heart rate.
Okay.
And also, when we're doing the procedure twice for 10 seconds, we make your heart go really fast, like 200,
Okay.
and we freeze it with the valve open. And we do that so that when we break open the valve, those little rocks don't go flying to your head.
Okay.
And also when we're putting in the new valve, it doesn't move. Okay. So your heart's doing this, trying to get blood out of your aortic valve. We stop it, and then we've removed the obstruction. So at the end of that time, your blood pressure either stays 0 or it's 200, and neither of those works. Okay, so that's why we have our fancy cardiac surgery anesthesiologists, and they have their little syringes, and they will bring your blood pressure
Pop it up.
Yeah, and you won't know, you're going to be asleep.
Sure.
Okay, so the other wire. So you're going to have one wire going up one side. It's called a pigtail. And
It's called a what?
a pigtail.
Pigtail.
It's got a curve in it, and it sits in the valve.
Okay.
And that's what we aim the camera at.
Okay.
Okay. Then they take another wire and go across the valve into your ventricle.
Okay.
And that's sometimes the trickiest part because it's a little teeny hole and it's moving. So they get it in there. That is a train track. They get everything up there too.
Okay.
So they will put a balloon across, make your heart go really fast, break open your valve, let you settle out. Then they crimp the valve down on a catheter the diameter of a pencil, and they put it in place. Dr. Durraj will say, does everyone agree it's in the right place? And everyone has to agree. And then they make your heart go really fast, and the surgeon inflates the balloon. Okay? So it's a joint procedure. You have a cardiologist, you have to have a wire guy and a scalpel guy. And we usually have 2 or 3 cardiologists in the room, and anesthesiologists. About 16 people altogether.
Okay.
Most of the time, everybody's just standing around staring at the monitor, and that's what you want. So they'll inflate the balloon, and then everyone will stare at the monitor. And what they're looking for is leak. So or regurgitation. So if you sew in a valve, you never have leak, correct? But we're putting a round valve in an oval with rocks.
Okay.
So there's potential for leak. We hate leak. It's blood going backwards. It should be going forwards.
Okay.
It beats up your blood and makes you anemic, and it increases the risk for stroke.
Okay.
So we hate that. So what we used to do a lot of, and now we still sometimes do, but I always vote against it, is they put a couple extra cc's in the balloon and overstretch it. And so we don't really like doing that because, many of our patients are 95, and a 95-year-old aortic valve, you don't really want to overstretch.
Okay.
So the valve company has redesigned the valve. Okay. So It has a little skirt on it, and I'll tell you about the rest of it, the valve. But so if you get the biggest valve, it has a fabric skirt on it that kind of billows out, and it has holes, and blood backs up and clots and makes a seal.
Okay.
I think you'll probably get a 23 or 26 valve, in which case it has a 2-2 on it.
A 2-2. Okay.
Yeah, and so the blood gets in there and very, very little paravalvular leak.
Okay.
So the metal is cadmium chromium,
Okay.
which allows us to crimp it down, but there's no steel in it, so it won't rust and you can have an MRI. And then the leaflets are made out of the same thing that you would get a surgical valve made out of, and it's the tough outer covering of a cow heart. And we use it, cow pericardium, we use it for all sorts of things. We patch holes with it and whatnot. It's really tough. And they take it and they kind of leach it of proteins and kind of plasticize it. And there's a room in Irvine with 800 people per shift sewing these valves. It takes about 20 hours of labor to make one valve.
Interesting. And that's a bovine.
Uh-huh.
Uh.
And $32,000 for that valve, and worth every cent. Okay, so aren't you glad you have health insurance?
Boy, if it weren't, I would not be here, my dear.
So, the valve company, you know, we upload, they've helped us so much that Dr. Durraj and Dr. Cohen and I started this program from scratch.
Oh,
And we actually tried to help Northridge start a program too. So we, because we know it's hard for people to come from far away. And
this is a long,
yeah.
if it weren't for family, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to do it.
So, so anyway, they help us with the measurements and stuff, but they also watch us very closely. And if they think we're cutting any corners, they won't give us the valve.
Okay.
So like, I think that's really good.
Yes.
So they come to every implantation. They're our expert. They're like, oh, I think you should try, you know, a 23 balloon minus 2 cc's and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so
Quality control.
quality control, and they know all of the players in Southern California. So Cedars does more than anybody in the world. USC, UCLA, Good Sam. When they have loved ones that need a TAVR, they send them to Dr. Durraj.
Okay.
So I can't say enough good things about our team. I guess there are places where the cardiac surgeon, the cardiologist just yell at each other because the cardiologists kind of steal in their business. But our guys, they respect each other and work really well together, and it's just a joy to watch them.
Very good.
So anyway, so it takes about an hour to put you to sleep, put all the wires in, put the valve in. I know that it's good when Dr. Cohen rips off his gown and leaves the room. Otherwise, the comment is, oh, that looks pretty perfect. And I'll text you and I'll say, valve's in, nothing bad happened.
Okay.
Okay? And then it takes about half an hour to wake her up, make sure she didn't have a stroke. About 20% of the time, we'll send you to the ICU.
Okay.
Because if we're at all worried about this little electrical circuit, and one of the things that would make us worry is if your QRS, your spike,
Right.
got wide.
Okay.
So we would send you to the ICU with that wire in place. About half the time, if we just park you in the ICU with that wire overnight, the swelling goes down and it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so don't read anything into it if she goes to the ICU. The other 80% of the time you go to the recovery room for 2 hours. By the way, you'll ooze. You'll go home with many bruises.
Yeah.
They're big holes
And they're done that.
in there, and also up here. There's a lot of people will be poking away at your groin, and so there's just so you know, there's a big difference between oozing and bleeding.
Yeah.
So oozing is kind of expected, it's a nuisance. Bleeding requires something else.
Yeah.
So at 4 hours, you turn into a pumpkin, and we get you out of bed.
Okay.
Okay? We expect your blood pressure to be higher, okay? Because there's no more obstruction, and your heart can pump really well.
Okay.
So expect us to be giving you blood pressure medicines and that sort of thing. And so you'll go home on more blood pressure medicine than you came in on.
Okay.
When you go home, most of the time, you go home better than you came in. That being said, some people are cheap dates with anesthesia.
Some people what?
Are cheap dates with anesthesia.
Okay.
and feel a little yucky.
Yeah.
We never send anyone home alone. We require that you have someone around for at least a week, but you've got a husband.
Yes.
And it's not because you'll need care.
It's just to have
She'll
somebody-
have extra people there because my dad has dementia.
Okay, well then he won't help.
No,
No, he won't help. Okay, so we need someone to be able to call for help if you get into trouble.
Absolutely.
That's
Yep.
all. So you'll go home, you'll be able to take a shower, you know, just no heavy lifting for a couple of weeks. But really, most people go home better.
Okay.
Um,
The duration of time that you're in the hospital is
It's
just overnight?
one to 2 nights.
1 to 2
If
nights.
we're worried about this, it'll be 2 nights.
2 nights.
Okay. So we've had 6 times out of 788, we've had patients go home and have this electrical circuit go out.
Okay.
Okay. Which leaves you with a heart rate that's too slow. Also, we've occasionally had people that we send them home on a bunch of blood pressure medicine and their heart figures out it doesn't need to work that hard and they're on too much. So
Okay.
the symptoms of that are dizziness, right?
Okay.
Right. So if she would go home and get dizzy, sit her down, take her blood pressure and heart rate, and let me know what that is.
Okay.
If God forbid she should do something like pass out, call 911 and then call me.
Okay.
And I can call any ER in Southern California and say, this happened last week. This is what her EKG looked like. These were her labs. Don't spend a lot of time figuring it out.
Okay.
So that's worked really well. What's really funny, 788 patients in almost 8 years, 6 patients this happened to twice in the same hour.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I had a patient, I sent the 911 and she was going into the ER at Arcadia, and I called ahead to the ER, said this is what's happening, and I'd already called the cardiologist over there that puts in the pacemakers. I'm like, just don't get her to the cath lab. And then I came back, thought I'd solved that, and then another daughter called me and said, my dad doesn't look very well. Well, sure enough, he had the same thing. And so I called the ER again. I'm like, I'm sending you a patient in heart block, and he's like, I know, she just got here. I'm like, no, it's another one.
Oh, dear God.
He's like, what do you people do? But that was quite a wild morning. And they're both fine.
Okay.
They're both fine.
That's good.
And that was a couple of years ago.
Pretty good statistics out of 788.
Yeah, so, and I'm kind of a psycho about this job. So I keep track of those.